In the vast expanse of space, where interstellar diplomacy and fragile alliances held the galaxy together, the term Deathworlder was spoken with both reverence and fear. Deathworlders were inhabitants of planets classified as dangerous, hostile to life. Earth was one such planet, teeming with unpredictable weather, deadly creatures, and elements that could snuff out life in an instant. Yet, humans had thrived, becoming a race known for their resilience and adaptability. Other species watched them warily, respecting their strength while remaining cautious of their unpredictability. Today, however, that cautious respect teetered dangerously on the edge of full-blown panic. It all started with a simple, almost absurd event: an interstellar summit held on the sprawling space station, Enthur Omega, floating peacefully near the neutral planet of Praxilion. Leaders and dignitaries from dozens of species had gathered for important negotiations, discussing trade agreements, planetary rights, and alliances. Among them was Lieutenant Commander Jake Halley, a human diplomat from Earth. Jake was known for his laid-back attitude, a stark contrast to his rigorous military background. He'd been handpicked for this assignment due to his ability to keep cool under pressure and his charm in navigating tricky political waters. He had spent weeks on Enthur Omega, representing humanity in intense discussions with the galaxy's most powerful factions. But it wasn't a political crisis that set the galactic community ablaze, it was Jake's Sunburn. The summit had taken a short recess, and Jake, always one to enjoy the sun, had taken the opportunity to relax in one of the open-air sections of the station, specifically designed to replicate natural environments for visiting dignitaries. The star that Praxilion orbited was a bit closer than Earth's sun, but the engineers had assured everyone that it was perfectly safe to spend time outside without any specialized protection. So, Jake had kicked back, soaking in the rays and enjoying the warmth. Hours later, when the negotiations resumed, Jake returned to the meeting room, looking slightly off. His normally pale skin had turned a shade of red that would have been alarming to anyone who didn't understand the concept of a sunburn. The alien delegates, however, did not understand. Sitting across from Jake was Ambassador Vdran, a tall, elegant member of the Avlok species, whose thin, feathery skin shimmered in the artificial light. The Avlok were known for their sensitivity to radiation. Even a slight increase in background radiation levels could send them into a state of panic. Vdran's large, multifaceted eyes immediately locked onto Jake's reddened skin. "Lieutenant Commander Halley," Vdran began, his voice a mix of curiosity and concern, "you appear to be injured." Jake blinked, looking around the table at the various ambassadors and officials, all now staring at him with growing concern. He followed their gaze down to his arm, realizing his skin had taken on a bright red hue. He chuckled, waving it off. "Oh, this? It's nothing, just a sunburn," he said casually, leaning back in his chair. "A sunburn?" repeated Ambassador Zikrael, a large, heavily armored reptilian being from the planet Aurochs. His voice rumbled like an earthquake. "You are burning? How can you be so calm?" Jake waved his hand dismissively. "It's nothing serious, just spent a little too much time in the sun. It'll fade in a couple of days." The room fell silent, eyes widened, and whispers broke out among the alien dignitaries. Jake could feel the tension growing, but he didn't understand why. To him, sunburn was a mild inconvenience, nothing to panic about. To the aliens, however, this was a catastrophe. Behind the scenes, the station's medical and security teams had already been alerted. Vdran had discreetly activated a silent alarm, and now, the medical staff, composed of various species, rushed to the conference room, pushing a mobile scanner in front of them. They burst in, much to Jake's confusion, and immediately began scanning the area. "What the hell is going on?" Jake asked, standing up from his seat. The head medic, a small, insectoid creature with multiple arms, scanned Jake thoroughly before stepping back in horror. "His radiation levels, they're off the charts." "Radiation?" Jake yelped, eyes widening. "It's just a sunburn, you know, UV light, heat from the star outside, happens all the time on Earth." The medics exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable to Jake but clearly filled with concern. Ambassador Talek, a member of the Zeltar species known for their advanced medical knowledge, stepped forward, his three eyes narrowing as he addressed Jake. "Commander Halley, on most planets, exposure to such radiation levels would be fatal. Your skin is literally burning, and you remain standing?" Jake blinked. "Yeah, I mean, it stings a bit, but it's just a sunburn." The word sunburn had little meaning to the aliens. All they understood was that a human had exposed himself to dangerous radiation levels. His skin had burned as a result, and yet he stood before them as if nothing had happened. The implications were terrifying. In the hours that followed, the situation escalated rapidly. News of the Deathworlders' radiation poisoning spread throughout the station and beyond. Species that had only ever heard of humanity in passing were now hearing tales of humans walking casually through radiation storms, shrugging off deadly rays that would incinerate most other life forms. Panic began to take root among the station's inhabitants. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed the human was a walking nuclear reactor, leaking dangerous radiation everywhere he went. Others whispered that the humans were planning to weaponize their natural resistance to radiation. Some even speculated that Earth itself was a planet saturated with lethal radiation, and that its inhabitants had evolved to thrive in such an environment. Jake, completely oblivious to the chaos unfolding around him, was finally approached by Captain Ilra, the station's commander, who demanded an explanation. As Jake explained the concept of a sunburn, how it was a result of UV rays from the sun, not dangerous radiation, Ilra's face remained impassive. She struggled to comprehend the human's nonchalance toward what was, to her and many others, a life-threatening situation. But as the panic continued to spread, Jake realized he needed to address the growing fears. During a specially convened meeting, he stood before a gathering of alien representatives, all of whom stared at him with a mixture of awe and fear. "Listen," Jake began, his voice calm but firm. "I know you're all worried, but I promise you this isn't some deadly disease or dangerous radiation. It's just a natural reaction humans have when exposed to too much sunlight." He pulled up an image of a sunny beach on Earth, with humans casually walking around, some of them clearly sunburned but smiling and enjoying their time. "This is what we call a sunburn. It happens to us when we stay in the sun for too long. It's annoying, but it's harmless." The aliens stared at the image, their disbelief palpable. "You see," Jake continued, "humans are adaptable. Our planet is, well, it's dangerous by most galactic standards. We have wild weather, unpredictable ecosystems, and yes, a sun that can burn our skin if we aren't careful, but we've learned to live with it. We don't see it as a death sentence. It's just part of life." The room was silent for a moment before Talek spoke up. "So, your species has evolved to withstand deadly levels of radiation?" Jake shook his head. "No, not deadly, just inconvenient." There was another pause, and then, slowly, the tension in the room began to dissipate. The alien leaders exchanged glances, realizing that while humans were indeed resilient, they weren't the walking hazards they had feared. But as the meeting concluded, one thing remained clear to every species present: humanity was not to be underestimated. What they considered a mere inconvenience would have been a deadly crisis for most other species, and while the sunburn itself was harmless, the message it sent was not. The galaxy had learned something that day. Humanity, the so-called Deathworlders, had a way of surviving and thriving in conditions that others found unthinkable, and as the aliens left the meeting, they couldn't help but wonder what other dangers had humanity casually shrugged off that they, themselves, would not have survived? In the days that followed, the story of the human sunburn incident spread across the galaxy, becoming a cautionary tale, a legend even. It was said that humans were a species that laughed in the face of danger, who called deadly hazards minor annoyances. They were a species that had survived and thrived on a planet so dangerous that no other species dared visit it for long. And as for Jake Halley, he returned to his duties, blissfully unaware that he had sparked a galactic-wide panic over something as simple as sunburn. He would never know just how much fear and respect his resilience had earned his people in the eyes of the galaxy. For humanity, it was just another day under the sun. As the days passed, the aftermath of Jake Halley's sunburn incident rippled far beyond the walls of Nthor Omega. Reports, whispers, and exaggerated tales spread like wildfire across the galaxy, reaching distant star systems and species that had never before given Earth much thought. It was now impossible to discuss humans without mentioning their alarming ability to shrug off what others considered deadly. The idea that these so-called Deathworlders could casually withstand lethal radiation, and who knew what else, became a point of intense fascination and fear. Many species, especially those with fragile ecosystems or sensitive biology, began rethinking their approach to humans. Diplomatic channels, which once viewed Earth's inclusion in the galactic community as little more than a formality, now buzzed with newfound respect. Trade agreements that had previously stalled were suddenly fast-tracked, with alien governments eager to align themselves with these indestructible beings from the blue planet. Meanwhile, Jake remained largely oblivious to the frenzy his simple sunburn had caused. Back on Earth, sunburns were an everyday occurrence, especially in the summer months. It wasn't something that made headlines. He couldn't quite wrap his head around why the aliens were so spooked. Even his fellow human diplomats found the situation amusing. What next? Would the aliens panic if they found out humans could endure minor cuts or colds without immediate medical intervention? But while Jake treated it all as an amusing misunderstanding, things were happening behind the scenes. Far away, on the highly advanced world of Palaxis Prime, the Palaxian scientists, known for their cutting-edge research into biological and technological advancements, were not amused. Their leader, High Chancellor Sarala, was briefed on the event with grave seriousness. This human sunburn incident, Sarala began, reviewing the data on her holoscreen, is more than a mere anecdote. It represents a significant gap in our understanding of the Deathworlders' biology. We need to learn more. She ordered an immediate study of Earth's atmosphere, climate, and solar radiation patterns, aiming to understand what had shaped humans into such resilient beings. They had already known that Deathworlders were tougher than most, but this was on another level. One of her top researchers, Dr. Kelrith, chimed in. The human body seems to have developed layers of defense mechanisms we don't fully comprehend. If they can withstand natural radiation to this degree, what other environmental dangers have they overcome? The research expanded, delving into Earth's violent storms, earthquakes, volcanoes, and even its biological threats, bacteria, viruses, parasites. They realized that humans were a product of relentless evolution, shaped by their world to adapt, survive, and thrive in conditions other species would never endure. Earth was not just a planet, it was a crucible of hardship, and the humans were its survivors. The Palaxians weren't the only ones studying humans more closely. Other species, particularly those with expansionist tendencies, began quietly probing into human history, hoping to uncover weaknesses, but all they found was a species that refused to die, a species that had made endurance their art form. Back on Enthar Omega, Jake was making his rounds, continuing his diplomatic duties with his usual casual charm. He'd almost forgotten about the sunburn incident until he walked into a negotiation chamber and noticed the looks on the alien delegates' faces. The new arrivals from the Zarak Collective, a species notorious for their love of cold, sterile environments, recoiled slightly at his presence. Jake noticed the subtle shifts in their postures, the way they exchanged nervous glances. Their leader, Commander Viral, spoke with careful politeness. Lieutenant Commander Halley, Viral began, his voice soft and cautious. We have heard stories. Jake raised an eyebrow. Stories? Viral nodded. About your resilience. Jake chuckled. Oh, you mean the sunburn thing? Viral hesitated. Yes, we have been informed of the event. It is said that you withstood what would have been a lethal dose of radiation for most species. Jake laughed, shaking his head. Lethal? Nah, it's just UV rays, harmless in small doses. We humans deal with it all the time. But Viral didn't laugh. The Zarak had evolved in environments where radiation of any kind was dangerous. The idea of willingly exposing oneself to it, even for recreation, was unthinkable. That is remarkable, Viral muttered, clearly unsettled. He exchanged another glance with his officers, who seemed equally perturbed. Over the following months, humans found themselves in a strange position. As more species learned of their resilience, the attitudes toward them shifted. What had once been casual indifference turned into cautious respect, even fear. Humans, it seemed, were becoming a legend among the stars. Deathworlders, born from a planet so dangerous that its inhabitants treated hazards like radiation as mere inconveniences. Some humans found the change amusing, while others worried about the implications. Jake, now somewhat of a galactic celebrity, was constantly asked to explain human physiology to confused aliens. He did his best, but no matter how much he downplayed it, the galaxy seemed determined to see humans as indestructible warriors who had evolved in a world of fire and death. Then, the inevitable happened. On the edges of known space, a rogue faction known as the Vorgoth Coalition saw the human resilience as both a threat and an opportunity. Led by the ambitious warlord Nzur, the Vorgoth had been amassing power by conquering weaker star systems, But when they learned of Earth's hardy inhabitants, they decided that humanity was a danger to their expansion. They couldn't risk allowing such a resilient species to stand unchallenged. And so, the first skirmish between humans and the Vorgoth began. It was a small outpost on the edge of the solar system, a routine patrol ship, manned by a handful of humans and a mix of other species. The Vorgoth ambushed them, expecting a quick and easy victory. They were wrong. The Vorgoth fleet was well armed and ruthless, but the human crew fought back with a tenacity the attackers hadn't anticipated. Even as their ship was breached, the humans continued to resist. When the station's hull was compromised, and the radiation alarms blared, the non-human crew members panicked, retreating to the safe zones. But not the humans. They donned basic protective gear and continued to fight in the irradiated sections of the station, seemingly unaffected by the deadly conditions. The Vorgoth, expecting their enemies to retreat or die, were shocked to find the humans still standing, still fighting, still breathing. It wasn't long before word of the battle reached the greater galaxy. The legend of the Deathworlders grew. Jake Halley, now back on Earth after his long diplomatic tour, received a message from the Galactic Alliance. They wanted to know if the stories were true, if humans really could fight through radiation, through fire, through the harshest environments the galaxy could throw at them. He laughed as he read the message. Humans weren't invincible, not by a long shot. They weren't gods, nor were they impervious to pain or injury, but they were survivors, and they had learned to live with hardship in ways that other species couldn't comprehend. As he penned his response, Jake thought about how far humanity had come from being seen as an unremarkable species on a backwater planet to being feared and respected across the galaxy. The galaxy had learned to fear the Deathworlders, not because they sought to conquer, but because they simply wouldn't die. The next time Jake looked in the mirror, he saw the faint tan line where his sunburn had once been, and he smiled. Who would have thought that something so simple could spark such a galactic uproar? As the galaxy continued to grapple with the reality of humanity's resilience, one thing became clear: Deathworlders were no longer seen as a primitive species from a dangerous world. They were seen as something much more. And the galaxy would never be the same.